We have finally got our first pretty dicey slate of the year for NFL DFS because not only are we missing Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, guys like that as far as high upside quarterbacks go, but also a lot of the games that you could view as being like secondary games with good potential to be high scoring are dealing with some pretty rough weather. We're going to break down what that means, why we care about weather, which plays we like after considering the weather, and much more to get you ready for Week 6 in NFL DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as always by Brandon Gdula. Check him out on Twitter at Gdula13. You can find his work over at FanDuel Research, where he is a senior managing editor. Brandon, we are on to week number 6, and I am honestly feeling a bit uneasy about the slate. How are you doing today?
Yeah, kind of the same. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had some weeks where we had a lot of overlap. I think we have a lot of overlap with our player picks this week because there's a few, I don't want to say obvious, but a few plays, a few games that really stand out to us in terms of, we've been doing this podcast for like 8 years. This might be our 8th season.
It's our 9th NFL season.
9th NFL season. Naturally, our processes are probably going to start to blend together a bit. But, there are some plays where I feel like if I'm building a lineup, 2-3 lineups, like I can feel good with that. Outside of that, I feel like I would be building around those same core plays, but then kind of guessing at like, okay, which game, almost every game has some sort of concern. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the ones in domes are teams that we don't want. So it's like, okay, well, what if this game is good? I'll rotate in like a stack from that. I don't like doing that stuff. So I feel good with like 1 to maybe 5 lineups where I can get enough. And it does help that the lack of upside quarterbacks brings into play someone like a Matthew Stafford, who usually doesn't fit our process. You're kind of betting against maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 like really high upside quarterbacks. So if they don't go off, then you're going to see someone like in the 7,000 range naturally be in the perfect lineup. And that does change things where we're not feeling like we need Mahomes or Josh Allen. So, I like the slate, but I do feel uneasy. I think that's a good word that you use.
Yeah. And it's not just the quarterbacks, but also at tight end. Like there's no Travis Kelce on the main slate. There's no Mark Andrews. And I feel like it kind of sets up as being a week where I want to pepper the mid-range at kind of every position, honestly, outside of maybe quarterback, because Jalen Hurts is still pretty fun despite a tough matchup with the Jets. But like, I think it's a good week to be very balanced. And typically I don't go that way for NFL DFS. I want to get to, McCaffrey this week, but like other weeks, you're trying to get to the high upside quarterbacks, get to the Justin Jeffersons, things like that. And this week is very different. So we'll break down our thoughts, who we do like, and get you ready for week 7 or week 6 here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. We, of course, are here on Mondays and Thursdays. It's your literal schedule, Jim. You can figure this out. Every Monday and Thursday, talking NFL DFS, recap show Monday, preview show Thursday. Austin Swaim has UFC breakdowns here on the stream as well. And of course, Tom Vecchio back with you for the daily ISO for NBA DFS just around the corner. To get all those shows as they are posted, make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find us on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus. To get FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log in with your FanDuel account, or check out FanDuel TV Plus on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. Do not forget there's also a free play up on FanDuel Research for this week. Go to FanDuel.com/research on the homepage. Find a link to the free play there. FanDuel.com/research to get a link to a free play for this week. You should always want free entries for DFS. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel.com and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL, must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777. Or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, we kind of discussed this earlier on, but let's dig in now to the slate overview for this week. And Brandon, to me, it comes down to dissecting which games we can trust after accounting for the weather, because the weather is tough. And I think that to me leads to a very balanced approach for this week. So to me, it is figuring out which plays stand out despite the weather and skewing towards balance, at least with the way things break down right now. What's your overall view of this week 6 main slate?
Jaguars. Yeah, that's kind of like I said, we're on a lot of the same plays as we'll talk about by the end of the show. We'll talk about why weather is something to be aware of and be I don't say just concerned about, but like aware of.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the slate overview, like my goal by the end of the show is to figure out which games I actually like. It's been hard. I'm asking myself a lot of questions as I go through, like, do I like this game? How much do I like this game? There's Indy and Jacksonville, and then there's some interesting offenses in certain games, but do we like the Dolphins enough, with a blowout potential? Does blowout potential, you made a good point before the show. If there aren't any good games, there are no good games, and therefore maybe just take advantage of that by rostering the best offenses like Miami. So I have a lot of work to do. I've been asking myself these questions. Usually I have a somewhat clearer picture by the time we start this, but this week in particular, it's kind of tricky.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I would say this is the toughest slate we've had so far this year. Toughest slate we've had in a bit. There were some last year that I think were worse than this as far as like difficulty. But this one's up there for sure. And it'll make things, tough when you're filling out lineups, but that's not a bad thing necessarily because it's tough for everyone. So it's not like it's just you having a rough time with this. But I think that it's a good week to be considerate of a lot of things. And I think that gives the people who give a lot of thought to this a leg up when it comes to DFS. So it's a good week despite the fact it's tough.
It's always a good week to be considerate.
I agree. Thank you, Brandon, for your contributions. I respect you and appreciate you. Let's talk about some injuries here in week number 6, and they're kind of bummers. Devon Achane is on injured reserve with a knee injury. The Dolphins also have Jeff Wilson now back at practice. He was limited on Wednesday due to his abdomen and finger issues. I don't know if those are related, but he can be back this week. We'll talk about the Dolphins in the bookmaker section. Justin Jefferson also on IR. His is with a hamstring injury. The Vikings facing a very leaky Bears defense, but that is a legit needle mover to loosen this offense. And it's also one of the higher wind games on the slate, 13 miles per hour in Chicago, potentially some rain there. It's also raining this entire week in Chicago. So the grass there is probably going to be a nightmare. How are you viewing the Vikings with no Justin Jefferson?
So you run your own NFL model. I know you're mostly looking at spreads, but what do you think the spread or total would be here if Jefferson were healthy? Because like their implied team total is still reasonable at 23.5.
Give me to run it.
If you want, I
All right,
mean,
cool.
do you do totals? I thought you didn't do totals.
I do.
That's new. At least new to me.
Okay, so if I put Jefferson in, I have the Vikings. I can't find Minnesota on my spreadsheet. I had the Vikings favored by 4.4 with Jefferson in.
Okay.
And I had the total for this game at 43.5. If I reduce the wind speed to 0, the total's up to 45.7. Okay. So if we had Jefferson and the winds were less of a concern, then I could see this game being pretty good for stacking, but both those issues do play pretty legitimate roles.
The point I was, really trying to make was that sounds then like their implied team total would be in the 24 to 25 range. I can't do that level of math in my head.
So that'd be right.
It's a really simple formula, but too hard to do in my head. Mm-hmm. That would put them at like third or fourth on the main slate. Whereas right now they're about like 6th or 7th. So like, it's not like the expectation is that the offensive efficiency bottoms out, but I don't think we've really made this point yet this season. NFL DFS is not the same as like MLB or NBA where, you get a minimum salary player hitting leadoff. Like there's more that you still got to figure out if that player's worth it, but you get someone at like near a minimum salary projected for 32 minutes in NBA. That's hard to pass up.
Correct.
Whenever you take a superstar off the field in the NFL, offensive efficiency almost always goes down. There aren't too many more impactful players than Justin Jefferson. Even with that, the expectations are still reasonable this week, especially within the context of the whole slate. So I think normally if this were like, we got the Chiefs, we got the Bills, the Ravens in like a good matchup, I'd probably say I'll pass and hope that the offense just struggles without Jefferson. This week, though, it's harder to do. So I'm still intrigued, specifically with Jordan Addison. But and TJ Hawkinson because tight end's bad. But I don't think I'll be alone in that. But it's probably enough for me to move away from Kirk Cousins.
Definitely off Kirk. I think the bigger question for me, at least, is it enough for you to get to KJ Osborne, whose salary is 62? And like Osborne's a fine player, doesn't tend to show upside when Jefferson is there, but target share should increase. Maybe he gets more downfield work. I agree with you on Addison Hawkinson. I'm asking you about Osborne because I don't really know how to think about it myself.
Yeah, he's the kind of player, we talk about, the Vikings in high octane games. He's in consideration as it is. It's tough to figure out what his target share will be, but he's been, full season, he's been running ahead of Jordan Addison. By the end of the season, let's say Jefferson was healthy. By the end of the season, that was probably going to change as Addison, just overtook him. But I don't want to say 6,200 is a high salary, but it's not a low salary.
Low. You're right. Yeah.
And there are some other names, this week in that like mid to low 6,000 range.
KJ Osborne or Chris Godwin. I know what I'm taking, and it's not KJ Osborne.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like out of 10 times.
Tyler Lockett's 66 too. Like
Michael Pittman in a game that we are open to, or like the most, basically.
Yeah. So I'd like him to be in the 5,000 range, I think, to really get there, especially with the win being what it is. Also, on the Justin Jefferson point, Ben Fox he wrote a piece for USA Today or for the win, talking about which players, non-quarterbacks, are most valuable towards the spread. Justin Jefferson is number 3 at 1.67 points. He talked to bookmakers, for their view of that, and Jefferson was like 3rd, most valuable behind Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. So I think that's fair to downgrade Kirk Cousins. I'm not going to consider him as a result of that personally. And Addison's fine. Hawkinson's fine, but it's not ideal. Anthony Richardson is on IR due to a shoulder injury, which means Gardner Minshew will start against the Jaguars. Revenge game. Oh, baby. We'll talk about that game in the bookmakers section. Amon-Ra St. Brown returned to practice Wednesday. Has a good shot to play in week 6. Jahmyr Gibbs did not practice, but is day-to-day. The Lions are facing the Bucs in a game that is decently fun, but does carry, I think, 13-mile-per-hour winds right now. What's your view of David Montgomery and the pass catchers here if Amon-Ra is back, but Gibbs cannot go?
So that's a situation where the offense should play better with Amon-Ra, and that has a trickle effect.
After they hung 42 on the Panthers last week without him?
I mean, yeah, but...
I mean, it's the best quarterback in football, so what do you expect,
Well, I mean, they came out and said, basically, they view David Montgomery as, like... the quote was something like, you need to have a guy you can just get 20 to 25 carries, and, like, Jahmyr Gibbs is the change of pace. It's like... That's pretty telling. The salary came down for him from 85. It's not quite the same rushing defense for Tampa Bay that it has been in recent years. He is scoring like crazy, but there's yardage upside because of how much volume there is. And David Montgomery, he's a pretty good back. I mean, he's the dude with the meme of having like the Franken running back with everyone's best traits.
Although it's like a little bit slanderous now because it's like the feet of Zeke Elliott or something like that. And it's like,
look, I mean,
like I'll take Montgomery now over Zeke.
Yeah, now, but I mean, he's had 121, 109 rushing yards, 67 and 74. Before that, he's just. I'm not going to turn him
6
down.
Targets last week without. Well, that was with no St. Browns. That impacted too. But like he was involved in the passing game when Gibbs is out too.
So I'm definitely not against Montgomery. I just don't know if he's quite a core play.
Like, would you rank him above ETN at 77? If we assume there's no Gibbs.
No.
I agree. Like, I like Montgomery, but I just adore ETN. So,
yeah,
and like that range is really good because you've got Kyron Williams there at 82, ETN 77, Alvin Kamara 74. I like him once again this week. Mixon 7,000. So, like, I think Montgomery is a guy worth getting to, but I agree with you, we're probably not going to be a core play just because like the salary's high, and I just like a lot of guys with lower salaries equally.
You like Kyron more than Montgomery?
By a hair, yeah. Do you want to do a bet? Because I'm fine with that.
Sure. I mean, I'm close. I like both. I just like a lot of running backs, and I hate that. When I like a lot of running backs, that means I don't love anyone in particular.
Yeah. I like Kyron just because he's at home. It's a non-weather game, better matchup for him. So it's non-Kyron factors that push me there, which doesn't make you feel great, obviously, but also it's a great red zone role too. But yeah, I think they're in that same discussion. Anthony Rich. Oh, sorry. We should talk about the Lions pass catchers too. With Amon-Ra being back. Amon-Ra's salary is 77, which is not bad. So 78. So that's not bad. I could see like an Amon-Ra Godwin or Amon-Ra Rashad White game stack. So I think
good.
What?
Son Godwin stack.
Ooh, that's good. Okay. I might need to go for that one now.
Okay.
Well done. But thoughts on the Laporta and guys like that?
Yeah, I mean, our guy, Sam Laporta, who we both like, scoring twice last week. Just want to note that was on 4 targets, 3 catches. He's someone who we think clearly has yardage upside. He got to 84. That's his only game above 65, though. So, tight end is what it is. He's got some equity in terms of scoreability, downfield work. I think he's a really good tight end play week in, week out at this point. What's that?
We like Hawkinson more at 67 this week, right?
Well, I was going to say, I like him a lot. I think the salary is up too high after a 2-touchdown game. That's something that I've talked about in past years, and I eventually will trend again as like the impact of touchdowns and salary, but I think it's a little too high. I'd go Hawkinson there. I'm not going to talk anyone out of Sam Laporta, but
he's fine. He's fine. It's more so just like we prefer Hawkinson at the same salary, and there's some lower salary tight ends like Evan Engram, who we like too. So it's more about the rest of the options than Laporta himself.
Are you considering any other Lions other than those 3?
I think that Jameson Williams is going to eat into Josh Reynolds' work. He's not getting enough to be viable himself, I wouldn't think yet. So it's really Amon-Ra and Laporta, and I'm probably not going to be super into Laporta. So Amon-Ra, Montgomery, run it back with Godwin or Rashad White, I think that's totally fine for this game. Speaking of
Makes
Chris
sense.
Godwin, Mike Evans missed practice Wednesday with a hamstring injury. The Bucs are coming off a bye, so the fact that Evans didn't practice is not ideal. He's going to test his hamstring Friday, so there's still a shot he plays. But if Evans can't go, how does it alter your view of the Bucs passing game here?
Another situation where the offense is going to be worse, but Chris Godwin is, boy, how it's fallen off for him to be almost the same salary as KJ Osborne.
Even though his quarterback is better now than he was last year. I'm going to mute myself again. You're wearing your Bucks hat too, so I'll let you talk about this as I mute myself. It was a joke, people. Please don't get mad at me.
Yeah. Also, I'm not a homer of any team. I just like hats, so I probably should make that distinction because I'm going to talk positively about Chris Godwin. But coming off an 11 target game, 114 yards, hasn't scored yet. That stuff always matters. It's going to lower someone's, obviously their FanDuel output, but that's going to lower their salary. And then if you probably could just build some pretty good lineups if you tracked guys who are getting usage but haven't scored, and then maybe avoiding guys who have scored at a bunch of times in recent games.
Do you know Chris Godwin's red zone target share?
It might be my notes, but give me it.
37%. It's very good. Touchdowns will come.
Yeah. And just frankly, touchdowns on a per target basis, even if they're not directly in the red zone, are going to lead to touchdowns eventually.
Can we call Chris Godwin a core play? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think for the salary, even if Evans can play, he's not going to be 100%. So give me Godwin.
The Lions' rush defense this year has been pretty good, so it might encourage a bit more passing against them as well. So I think that lines up well for Godwin. Anthony Richardson is on IR due to a shoulder injury. That means Gardner Minshew will start for the Jags. Did I already say this? I did. Okay. Wow. Where am I? I am skipping around. Where? Okay. T. Higgins got into limited practice Wednesday with his broken rib. He practiced on Friday too, so it seems like he's trending toward playing. How would Higgins' availability impact your view of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase?
I hate to say, we're talking about offensive efficiency. T. Higgins is very good, so it's going to increase efficiency. I liked Jamar Chase. I should have talked about him a little bit more last week, and that's not just point chasing, but I liked him because of what his target share was last year without T. Higgins active. He got just fed. The salary's up, but I do like this game a bit. This is the kind of game that you can easily mini stack. I think Burrow's viable if he's getting if he's getting T back, so he's got two elite pass catchers. I think you could do worse. Again, we're basically looking at Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields can maybe throw Tua in there as someone who can get to like 35 because he could just throw for 6 touchdowns. But outside of that, I mean, I don't see why Burrow can't be the QB1, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I am. I think I'm into it. I don't necessarily think I'll be building around a passing game, but I do love Joe Mixon.
Yes, the wind here is 11 miles per hour, so not the biggest red flag in the slate, but noteworthy at least where the wind is there. I think the it's an okay game. It's a fine game. The Seahawks, another defense with much improved rush defense so far this year. It's a 4-game sample because they had their bye already, but like maybe that encourages more passing against them. Burrow looked a lot better on Sunday from like a mobility perspective, so that was encouraging. The Seahawks should get Tariq Woolen back for this game, which is an upgrade for their secondary, but I think Burrow's okay. I think he's like kind of like in the Stafford range, which is slanderous, like it's offensive. But like, just kind of being realistic with where things are right now. And that's okay. And Stafford's indoors, whereas Burrow is not. But I'm more middling on this offense. I'm gonna get there, I think, by default, just because I'm middling on a lot. Like middling on this slate is probably good. But yeah.
So like a healthy T. Higgins at 7,000, if he's full by Friday, of course.
He's been weird this year. I know he had the 2 touchdown game, but like he's had a pretty poopy year. And like, I don't know, getting somewhat like, is that just because of Burrow or is it like weird vibes? It's a contract. I think it's a contract year. So like you'd think he'd be balling out, but like, I don't know. He's had some really weird games.
So in games where he played at least half the snaps, the first 3, he had 8 targets, no catches, 12 targets, 8 for 89 and 2, 8 targets, 2 catches, 21. So if you just kind of look at 8, 12, and 8 targets in his completed games and know that Joe Burrow is bad in all of those, I think he's a better play than you. It sounds like you think he is.
Higgins or Calvin Ridley at the same salary?
Ridley.
I agree. That's a big part of it too. Is I like Ridley a lot, but Higgins, the guy I highlighted on Monday in the salary scrolls as liking, but like the win does impact things for me too. Bears running back Khalil Herbert is expected to miss week 6 with an ankle injury. Roshan Johnson suffered a concussion last week and did not practice Wednesday. Nor did Travis Homer, which would leave potentially Deontay Foreman as the lone man standing in this backfield. We'll talk about the Bears in the bookmakers section. Zay Jones missed practice Wednesday after suffering a setback in week 5. He's day-to-day, but obviously a missed practice is not ideal. We'll talk about the Jags in the bookmakers section. James Conner is heading to injured reserve for the Cardinals. He has an knee injury. Amari DeMarcado played a bunch of snaps in week 5, but that was with Keontae Ingram inactive. Ingram got in a limited practice Wednesday, though he did practice Thursday and Friday last week too before being inactive. We'll talk about the Cardinals in the bookmakers section. Deshaun Watson is at risk of missing a second consecutive game due to a shoulder injury. Did not practice Wednesday. PJ Walker would start if Watson cannot go. They're facing the 49ers. Wind speeds here, I believe, are 13 miles per hour. Are the Browns a complete cross-off for you right now?
Can I interest you in the 49ers defense at 5,000?
Of course you can, especially in a week where I'm going balanced elsewhere. Sure.
We don't allocate a lot of salary to defenses, but boy,
I'll do it. That's fine this week. No objections. Tank Dell didn't practice Wednesday due to a concussion. Seems likely to sit this week. Noah Brown is back at practice though and could come off IR. The Texans are in one of the few indoor games, but they're facing a Saints defense that I respect quite a bit. So any interest in this offense if Tank Dell cannot go?
I don't quite. Let me look at salaries again. Nico 68. Your guy Bobby Trees, Robert Woods 55. I don't know.
Yeah, if I include my prior, they are the 5th ranked pass defense New Orleans is. So like, I don't know. I love the Texans, my Texans, but I'll probably take a 1 week pause on that personally. Yeah. Oh well. Miles Sanders missed practice Wednesday with a shoulder injury. He had a groin injury previously, but was able to play through it and then hurt his shoulder in week 5. Chuba Hubbard could get a bigger workload if Sanders can't go. We'll talk about them in the bookmaker section. Speaking of which, let's dive in now to the Cardinals at the Rams, the highest total on the main slate at 48.5. The Rams are favored by 7, and that number has been going up a bit during the week, but that does mean the Cardinals' implied total is still pretty high. So neither defense is one we need to fear. Both offenses are, I would say, at least solid and have trustworthy pieces. So I like this game, Brandon, but will you get to either quarterback here for DFS?
I mean, you're asking me if I'll play Matthew Stafford, right?
No, I said, will you get to either quarterback?
But
I said what I said. I said what I said.
I mean, I guess, yeah. I guess that's a better forgive me for not really looking, for not being familiar with your game, Joshua
Did
Dobbs.
I stutter?
I mean, all right, where are you with Dobbs then?
Probably not, but I figured I'd ask you at least. This is like the question with Osborne, where I'm asking you because I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's better than I thought.
Yeah.
I try sometimes just to avoid getting suckered in. This week, though, so he's played, in terms of EPA per dropback, he's been at the league average. If you adjust for opponents where you would expect someone to play exactly to the level of opponents faced, where EPA per dropback would be a 0, he's at a 0.03. We know he can run the ball a bit. This is a divisional game. This team's scrappy. Oh, gosh.
I don't want to spend too much time here, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, well, but that could really change the slate, though.
Right?
Like, if you're playing Josh Dobbs, you can get...
They've had some tough matchups, too.
You can get to, like, McCaffrey easier or Tyreek easier.
I'm just asking questions here. What about Stafford?
I think he's playable.
Yeah.
And without assuming without Connor,
I have to throw more. Yeah. Okay.
well, throw more, but also he's got a 23% red zone rushing share.
Oh, okay.
Is this a 2 QB game?
I think it's like a 1 QB game where Stafford is like a 0.75 and Dobbs is a 0.25.
I can live with that.
Okay. Talk to me about Stafford then. $7,300 hasn't exceeded 17.16 FanDuel points yet, but the way we like to say things is, does he have the building blocks for upside? And he does from a yardage perspective. He's top 300 3 separate times. 334 is his max. They're facing a pretty bad defense, and they just run the ball so much inside the red zone. And like that could persist, that could stick, but he has Cooper Kupp now, which means they've got a trustworthy option inside the red zone. So I feel like Stafford is someone who could conceivably get me like 27 points, and that might be enough on this slate. It's not the easiest sell of all time, but like I'm receptive to it. Where are you?
Very receptive because of the sheer lack of the amount of like high upside quarterbacks he needs to contend with. But he's 7th in the league in EPA per dropback over expectation, adjusted for defense. Then same as Patrick Mahomes there, just for context. Yeah. This might be like a 1.5 QB game. They both might be like, maybe Stafford's a 1 and Dobbs is a half.
Okay. I think that's probably pretty fair. What about the other pieces inside this game? Let's talk about the Cardinals backfield. I am very, very uncomfortable with Amari DeMarcado because of the fact that Keontae Ingram wasn't active. Adam Schefter tweeted Wednesday that Ingram is still higher on the depth chart, and Schefter doesn't tweet for no reason. And so I feel like this will be a split, and I don't want to touch a split in this backfield personally. What about for you?
Yeah, they were both like 10 to 15% snap guys playing together early on this year. I say this kind of a lot, like, in season long, if you need one of these guys, like, sure. In DFS, there is an element of guessing as to what this backfield's going to look like. And while we're kind of higher on this offense than I thought we would be before we start talking about this game, this is not a good enough offense to sort of get a lot of juice out of two guys sharing work.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kyron 82 sounds like you're a bit lower on him than me. And like I get why, because the yardage upside has not been there. They're honestly just not a good rushing team, I don't think. And like he's had weird games. So like I get why you're not there. Any broader concerns for you with Kyron?
Just now, like Kupp's back, that's going to help the offense, but I think that's going to take away touchdown opportunities a little bit more. They've been run heavy, but I think you bring Cooper Kupp back, like it's going to kind of skew a little bit more toward getting Stafford some touchdowns.
In his defense, they face some really tough rush defenses. So if I look at their early down rushing numbers, they're at 0.00 net expected points per rush attempt in early downs. But once you adjust for opponents, they're at 0.07. So they get a pretty big boost for opponents they faced. So maybe the efficiency is better here taking on Arizona, whose rush defense is actually, they're a little bit, tiny bit worse than average. They're fine. But like, it's not the Eagles. It's not the 49ers who you just don't run the ball against. So maybe he's fine. I like him more than Montgomery, but I think both are pretty defensible. But I like ETN more than both. I like Kamara more than both as well, personally at 75. Pass catchers, we saw Cooper Kupp debut this past week, and honestly, you could not have asked for more. Yeah. I typically am a Kupp hater to a fault. I lost like several $1,000s because I refused to put him at MVP in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. It was great. So like Kupp's 87, he got 3 downfield targets. That's usually my nitpick with Kupp is I want more downfield juice, but he got that. And his salary is pretty low at 87. I like Nakua as well at 79. And then Marquise Brown didn't practice Wednesday, I believe, due to illness, so he should be okay. But I feel like the pass catchers here in Kupp, Nakua, and Brown are all very, very attractive. Where do you settle in on those 3?
Total agreement. I think Kupp's salary is going to be higher after this week. And sometimes if you just think about it that way, it's easier to talk yourself into someone. 3 downfield targets for me, 10 plus yards downfield for Kupp, 6 for Nakua, 1 red zone target for Kupp. So that was half, just the 2 red zone targets. But if you give weight to downfield targets and red zone targets, Nakua did have 15.2 targets worth of like expected FanDuel points, with Kupp at a 14.7. So both still very viable. I think Nakua probably going to get lost in the shuffle a little bit here. As for Brown, always like him. Salary 7,000, so that's the same exact salary as 2 other guys we talked about, Calvin Ridley and T. Higgins. How do you rank those 3?
Ridley 1, Brown 2 because he's indoors primarily. Higgins 3. I think that they're all kind of in the same tier though, probably.
Yeah.
Like that's why I want the mid-range this week, is because mid-range is stupid at receiver. It's very good at running back. I don't need to spend it for quarterback as much. So like, I just want to be in this mid-range a lot. So even though there are 3 guys I like here, I can see myself getting to all 3 pretty easily.
Yeah. We like this slate more than we did, I think, before the show already.
I'd agree with that. Any final thoughts for you on this game?
What about the tight ends?
Nope. Let's move on to the Panthers at the Dolphins, where right now the total is 48.5. The Dolphins are 13.5 point favorites. That puts their implied total at 31. Devon Achane is out. Jeff Wilson may be back off the PUP list, though. So what's your view of Dolphins and Panthers, and any bringbacks on the Panthers side of things?
I'm much more open to Miami this week because there don't seem to be a lot of back and forth high scoring games that are easier to stack. And sometimes you just want to take what you know, and it should be an efficient game for Miami. Biggest problem is going out of your way to prioritize Tyreek Hill. If you're not already building around like Christian McCaffrey and can kind of swap around salary that easily, like you gotta like deconstruct everything to fit in Tyreek. He doesn't necessarily need a bring back because he can just go for 150 and 2 and be the reason that it's a blowout. But Jalen Waddle 68, still very intrigued by him. It's four receivers without digging too deep in that 68 to 7,000 range. Very much in play. What are your thoughts on this passing game? Do you think there's going to be enough? Again, you don't really need the volume you want efficiency. There should be efficiency here. So what are your thoughts on the passing game?
Yeah, I don't think we need to bring back. I don't think we need a back and forth game, I should say, given the context of the slate where like it's going to be a lower scoring slate. So like Tua getting you 27, I keep throwing that number up. I think that's probably where you need to get a quarterback this week. That might be enough at $8,300. So I think Tua's in play. Wind here is a consideration because it's still, I think, 13 miles per hour for this one right now. So it's still, at least you can actually no, it's 9. Oh, hey, okay, so that's better. I actually have this as the highest total for me on the main slate. Is this game? So yeah, I'm into the passing game, and I think I'd want to go like we just assume that the Dolphins passing game goes nuts, which would mean having to pair with both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle and kind of playing it that way. Obviously, that's going to leave you a bit shorthanded, but like I think there's enough value at other spots to make that work as long as you're okay with prioritizing them.
Yeah, and how easy it is to forget that they just put up 70 points and that was a blowout. And like, I know that was rushing, but
yeah. Well, he had 4 touchdowns in that game too.
Right, but like a lot of the second half yardage and points were on the ground. But where does that leave us with Raheem Mostert then?
Yeah, I'm going to be probably pretty into him at 85 because the Panthers do struggle to stop the rush. It's a positive game script. Jeff Wilson, I think, will be a legitimate option in this backfield, but like Mostert was viable for DFS while contending with Achane, and Achane's better than Jeff Wilson. So 85 is high. It's not a low number, and it's not like he's a scorching value by any means. But I like him. I think, again, the issue comes down to, do I like him more than ETN? Do I like him more than Kamara? in the lower range. And on Sunday, I might, honestly. I wouldn't be shocked if I did. But right now, the mid range is the most attractive range at running back.
So let's say Jeff Wilson's full in practice by Friday. Talk me out of him at 5,000.
Oh,
wouldn't he have a role?
I think he'll have to.
Yeah,
honestly. Interesting. I don't know if I can talk you out of him, to be totally honest. I think that's a fair question to ask. Yeah, $5,000 for Jeff Wilson. He did run ahead of Mostert in a decent number of games last year when they were both healthy. So, like, I don't think that's a terrible question to ask.
I mean, we want home run hitters across the board. Wilson's salary opens us up to get some home run hitters like a McCaffrey, or you could even pair him with Tyreek because this team could score 50 points.
Right.
But I think he has tangible upside himself.
Yeah.
At that salary.
Fair question. What about Chuba Hubbard? Because Miles Sanders is banged up. If Sanders can't go, are you considering Hubbard as a bring back? Any of the pass catchers like Adam Thielen, whose salary is not low? I will say. What are you thinking about the Panthers here?
Oh, geez, he's 74. Would you play Miles Sanders this week if he were healthy?
No.
Then I don't want to play Chuba Hubbard at a $400 discount.
I just don't really want to touch this offense, to be fully honest.
Yeah.
Like, that's my issue. Like, Jonathan Mingo did get more work this past week, and like, I think it's not totally out of bounds to consider him at 49. Like, he's been getting targets. They'll have to throw a ton in this game. So, like, that's at least a consideration. But I might rather just go with no bring back on this team.
So he was third in routes last week, but 86% of them. You could do worse. I mean, it's not unthinkable to think that there might be a Jeff Wilson, Mingo, supreme value stack that is part of a great lineup, though.
Yeah.
Because 85 and a touchdown for Mingo, if they're throwing a ton from the get-go.
That's viable. Yeah, I could see that for sure. Any final thoughts for you on this one?
No.
Okay, let's dive in now to the Colts at the Jaguars. It's a higher total with a decently tight spread. Total is 46.5 right now. Jags are favored by 4.5. There is some win to deal with here, but it's not as bad as in other spots. It's also a repeat divisional matchup, and there's no Anthony Richardson on the Colts side here. So are you willing to stack this game?
Yes, because I want access to virtually every Jaguar with a pulse. So it's Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. They're all, I think they actually all might be loves for me.
Yeah, I had to like stop myself from putting too many Jags on the list. So I was like, okay, I've had one at quarterback, one at running back, one at receiver. I guess I'll skip over Ingram at tight end, even though I like him a lot too.
How many of your lineups will not have a Jacksonville player?
Minimal. Very few.
So there's a lot of ways to go with this one. Hardest part is bringing it back, or narrowing down, like, if you're starting a lineup from scratch and you like this offense the most of all the offenses, like, who is the first play you want? Seems like it might be Travis Etienne, but there are a lot of running backs you can get to as well. Sure. So maybe it's like Evan Ingram, and you're like, I think he's one of the best tight end plays, if not the best tight end play, reasonable salary. That's not to say like you build around Evan Ingram, but we have other receivers, we have other running backs, we have other quarterbacks, but I love Trevor Lawrence. Ingram might be someone I have a lot of exposure to as a result.
8 targets in 4 consecutive games, the tight end is bananas.
Yeah.
And if Zay Jones is out again, like, that just kind of locks in, I think, the target share is being respectable. Yeah. So Ingram at 55, like, in a vacuum is probably like maybe the best tight end play. I don't know. He's up there at least.
That's what I'm saying. And the Colts have let up the second highest target per route rate to tight ends. I think that should stabilize fairly quickly as a stat.
And I will have Trevor Lawrence in a good number of lineups. At quarterback, he's running a decent amount. His salary is 76. Good matchup for him. And I think that when I have Lawrence, I might just put Ingram in each of those lineups. Kind of like last week, it was like okay, every Jalen Hurts lineup, I'm just going to put Dallas Goedert in there because I don't want to deal with tight end. I'll just like attach him to my quarterback. And like, if the tight end is viable, I'm fine taking that approach. And I think that is the case here with Ingram and Lawrence.
Yeah, I agree. Ridley, Kirk, both in play. Love
Yeah.
ETN. Just again, there are ways to pivot away from those guys a little bit easier. What about the Colts for you?
I like Pittman quite a bit. $6,500. He's been getting a lot of work. He's had double-digit targets in 3 games. One of those games was with Minshew, kind of 2, because most of that Houston game was with Minshew, and then the Baltimore game as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hasn't had the best yardage upside, which is kind of like the story of his past couple of years, where he doesn't get a lot of downfield work. So, but his salary is 65. I prefer Godwin over Pittman, but I might wind up having more Pittman just because I'll have so many Jags lineups, and like he'll wind up being a bring back there. Pittman's overall target share this year 29%. He actually does have multiple deep targets in 3 consecutive games, which is, I guess, surprising to me. But like, yeah, I think Pittman's pretty fun at 65. You could talk me into Josh Downs if you want to at 56. His target shares have also been pretty good. Not as much downfield work for him as with Pittman, but like I don't think he's the worst option. Where are you at on those two?
Yeah, Pittman. He's not a core play for me, but he's an other to consider because I just love this game so much.
Mm-hmm.
As for Minshew, he's been really efficient once you adjust for opponents faced. 0.12 EPA per dropback over expectation. His ADOT's 6.6 yards, so his average depth of target, to clarify, league average right now is 7.8. So it's about a yard, 1 yard to yard and a half shorter than the league average. Don't love that,
Yeah,
but efficiency goes a long way. Passing success rate's a little bit below league average. This is not a case for playing Gardner Minshew. This is a case for the
correct.
viability of the offense.
Agreed.
I'm there with Pittman. Haven't thought about Downs. Don't
Yeah,
hate it.
yeah.
I think the next logical question then is, well, what about these? What about the backfield?
Nope.
Yeah,
I think Zach Moss is playing too well to completely get squeezed out.
that's
And
hilarious.
yeah, I mean, like, good for him. But like, it is hilarious. And JT is good enough where he'll get work eventually. So I feel like it'll be a split. It's not the offensive high, like they're not the Dolphins.
Mhm.
So it's hard to like a backfield if 2 guys are in play. So I'll just pass personally.
Yeah. Downs or Mingo? I know their salaries are different, but who are you more likely to kind of
It's a good question. Probably Downs, right?
probably?
System of a Downs, baby. It's his week. But I think it's more Pittman for me. And the salary gap
Right.
between them is not huge. Pittman's salary 65, Josh Downs 56. So again, I just want to pepper that mid range, and Pittman. I think I'll be able to get to Pittman this week, which I'd like to. With Kirk, we know that game where he like got no targets came against the same defense. They've said that they don't like Kirk as much against zone defenses, and the Colts run a lot of zone. We've seen him perk up since then. I feel like if Zay Jones can't go, we saw Kirk actually last week, even with Jones active, playing in more 2 receiver sets. So I feel like the setup for Kirk is better now than it was for that first Colts game. I would just rather get to Ridley at 7,000 personally. So like, I'm not off of Kirk. I just like Ridley more. Talk to me about Christian Kirk specifically in your view of him at 66.
Yeah, so the Colts are running the second most zone this season. I don't have this in my spreadsheet easily. Houston's first though, and he did play Houston. 4 for
It's only 6
54 and a
targets there,
touchdown.
though. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there's something to it. I guess I'll be lower on him. I'd be lower on him anyway because Calvin
Yeah.
Ridley's a much better play.
Yeah.
At a similar salary, so he's viable. But yeah, it's a good call out.
Any final thoughts for you on this game?
I think we covered it. It's a good game.
Alrighty, let's dive now into our trend section for week number 6. And you're starting things off here by talking about the Jets. I think this works 2 ways because the Jets, if they're going to be more pass heavy, that makes their offense more viable, but also it could make the Eagles offense on the opposing side more interesting too. So you're talking about the Jets and their quote unquote let it rip approach the past couple of weeks. What do you see when you dig into the data?
Yeah, some interesting trends here. And like you said, playing the Eagles, so we obviously have interest in the Eagles in any situation, but the Jets have some fantasy relevant plays in the right spots. What's standing out right now is somewhat of a shift in their pass rate. The team had a pass rate over expectation of -11% through 3 weeks, which was a league low. Pass rate over expectation accounts for things like down and distance, score, where you are in the game, that kind of stuff. So that's all factored in. But in week 4, their pass rate over expectation against the Chiefs, which I think is noteworthy, was a plus 6.8% overall, and a plus 11% in the first half and plus 18% in the first quarter. Those samples get smaller and smaller, but starting off a game is pass heavy is something that is noteworthy. In week 5, their pass rate over expectation was a minus 9.9% overall, but it was almost plus 16 points in the first quarter. Again, smaller sample there, but like they've shown a willingness to sort of open things up a bit. And that's honestly enough for me because I don't think they're going to play from ahead. They're going to have to throw. And it's not like they're just going to try to grind the clock away in this matchup. So naturally, that points us to one player in particular, Garrett Wilson. Just shy of a 32% target share on the season. And if you go game by game, he has at least a 27% target share in all 5 of them. Has not hit 85 yards yet. So I'll let you off the hook here, Jim, and say that there's, he's got a path to more yardage than that. But he's scoreless in 3 straight games after kind of, if memory serves, going like retro Cortland Sutton to earn himself 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, the first one was Sutton. The second one was Tyreek Hill, where he took a slant to the house. No, it wasn't a slant. It was downfield, but
yeah, but like he just sort of did it himself. It seemed like.
Yep.
Very reasonable salary of $6,900 for a workload like that. Once again, another receiver in that range, very much in play. Their other primary receiver is Allen Lazard. He's kind of the only other guy getting routes. 14.7% target share, just over 40 yards per game, and that's despite a catch rate over expectation of plus 12%. It's not a great combo of like catching more passes than you should and only averaging 40 yards a game. Because tight end is what it is, I'll mention Tyler Conklin at a salary of $4,900. He's run 2/3 of the routes. If we think this is a sort of pass-heavy game where there's some scoring, it's at least worth noting. But outside of Wilson, I think we could look to Breece Hall next. 194 scrimmage yards, 52% snap rate, 28 adjusted opportunity, so carries plus double your targets. There's room to grow with that snap rate. Therefore, there's some room to grow with the output, although there's really not a whole lot of room to grow with the output. But he's very much in play as well. I think this means that we shouldn't expect the Jets to run away and hide. They might come out of the gate trying to be competitive, throw the ball a bit more. And I don't, again, maybe they get ahead and milk the clock. I don't really see that happening.
Right.
But this is
for a reason. Yeah.
This is very appealing, and it's enough for me to get in on Hall and Wilson.
I think so too. And it's also enough where I'm like still pretty into the Eagles offense too.
Yeah.
Just because like if they're throwing the ball more, that keeps the clock rolling, or that prevents the clock from just like totally draining. It means the Jets offense may be more competitive, which pushes the Eagles more. And obviously the Jets defense is very good. I've seen some like talk this week that like, oh, they're not that hot. Like a lot of it's been like kind of late down funkiness. Their early down numbers against the pass, they're still very, very good, especially once you adjust for opponents. So it's a tough matchup, but it's also Jalen Hurts. And Hurts, I thought, played his best football of the year so far last week. So I think it means I can feel okay with Hurts. I can feel okay with pairing him with 1 or 2 of his pass catchers and then bringing it back with either Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall. I think I prefer Wilson right now between the two. Wind speeds here are 10 miles per hour, in large part because the Jets offensive line is banged up. No Elijah Vera Tucker for the rest of the year, which may hurt Hall's ability to run against this Eagles very good rush defense right now. And Wilson's getting good work for a similar salary. So I prefer Wilson over Hall. What about you?
I'm gonna take the easy way out and say like, why not both? But sure. Both of their salaries could easily be higher. It would not surprise me if Breece Hall plays 65 to 70% of the snaps as they kind of scale him up.
Yeah.
he's going to be involved. They don't really have another option.
Yeah.
And you're not going to just sort of scale back his workload or keep him at 50% of the snaps after what he did last week. Very, very different matchup in terms of defense. But for me, Hall, not over salaried despite a breakout game. So I'd probably lean Hall. But man, we got a lot of running backs and receivers who are like in the conversation. But
I think
none
it's
of
me
them are
trying to
like,
talk myself into a bring back here because I do like
I
the Eagles
guess.
offense.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what I'm doing personally. But yeah, I think that there's enough here. I think Wilson's going to have a huge game very soon. If they keep up with this let rip approach, I think that he'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
And maybe it's this week, but they also have a really good schedule post bye, so maybe it comes then instead. My first trend this week is talking about wind. We've kind of danced around it so far, but and it is still pretty far away from Sunday, but the weather forecast looks really gross for this week. And there are just 4 indoor games, and a lot of those indoor games suck. So it's a big issue. I wanted to run through why we care about wind when building lineups. Brandon gave me data so I can compare how quarterbacks were projected versus their actual in-game output. So thank you, Brandon, for that. Looked at quarterbacks from 2018 on who were projected for at least 10 FanDuel points. On average, quarterbacks playing in double-digit wind speeds underperform their projections by 7%. So it's not 0, but it is a downgrade. Meanwhile, those in lower wind speeds underperform their projections by 1%. Injuries and things like that do lead to players underperforming in general on average, their projections. So 1% downgrade overall versus 7% in 10 plus mile per hour winds. That's a pretty big thing to consider. And again, this is projections, which probably account for the total. And totals go down in high wind speed or games with high wind speeds, like the Vikings Bears, I think was like 49 on the look ahead line, and it's 40 something. It's a lot lower right now. So this is after accounting for the fact totals come down. Downgrade was less impactful for upside, but it was still there. Quarterbacks hit in double-digit wind speeds, hit 4x their salary implied total at a 5.9%, or in single-digit wind speeds, hit 4x at a 5.9% rate. It was 4.9% for those in higher winds. So they can go off. 4.9% is fine, but they did it less often in guys in lower wind speeds. At wide receiver, the underperforming projections was even more apparent as the wind went up. Receivers, looking at those, projected for 5+ FanDuel points in wind speeds of 0 to 4 miles per hour, actually outperformed their projections by 1.8%. It was negative 1.9% for winds of 5 to 9 miles per hour, negative 4.2% in 10 to 14 mile per hour winds, and negative 5.9% in wind speeds of 15+ miles per hour. Receivers in the high winds hit 3x value 8.3% of the time. It was above 10% as long as the wind speed was below 14 miles per hour. So big dip there again. So they were capable of upside gains, but it's a game of small edges. And we kind of got to take the edge where we can get it. And there was an edge in downgrading receivers in that range. And you could be asking, well, like, okay, we'll downgrade these receivers, but they can't hit upside. What if their roster rate goes down? It kind of doesn't. I did a study back in 2021 looking at how reactive the public is to wind speeds. And if you look at heavily rostered wide receivers, they were in wind speeds of 10+ miles per hour, 35.7% of the time. Receivers in perfect lineups were in high wind speeds 24.2%. So again, 24.2% for perfect wide receivers, 35.7% for popular wide receivers. So the public over rostered receivers and heavy winds. This is back in 2021, but like, I think it's important to note that people aren't reactive as they should be to high wind speeds. Running back, it didn't matter as much, but I think the overall takeaway here is it's not impossible for players in heavy winds to go off, but it is less likely. We should take these advantages where we get them, and the public is less reactive to wind speed than they potentially should be. So how much does weather on a slate like this muddy things up for you from a lineup building perspective?
Well, it helps because it helps me disregard games that have high winds, because we know that the data long term says that these projections should be lower. Like basically players underperform, and a small percentage boost whether positive or negative, goes a long way across a 9-player lineup. If you just sort of multiply small percentages or even high percentages over 9 players, that like
Right.
it gets very, very, very small very quickly. So these things matter. And one thing that jumped out was when you cited the 4x rate for, I think, QBs in particular, where like guys can go off.
Yeah.
That leads people to think that what like wind doesn't matter, right?
Right.
So it's not that you can't consider players in high win games. This week in particular, there are a lot, so you kind of can't avoid it.
The opportunity cost is lower as a result. Yeah.
And yeah, so I think like the fairest sort of question is like, let's just pick a game with a really high wind speed, like the Bears and Vikings, versus an indoor game such as like the Saints and Texans.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean that we like the Saints and Texans game more.
Right.
Like it's not just blindly picking games by wind speed, but it just sort of works holistically. And this week in particular, if there were maybe 2 or 3 games with really high wind speeds, that would help out a lot. But
Right.
it's all across the board, and I don't want to chase the indoor games just for the sake of it.
I might, but
You might chase like the
like
Saints game.
that's why that's why I'm receptive to Stafford and Dobbs. Whereas like if it's a normal slate, I'm not getting to Matthew Stafford. But like Dobbs, I might.
So if there, even with the QBs we have, if there were no weather concerns, like who are you kind of downgrading a ton because of weather?
Fields. Primarily Fields, but then it's a lot of like the receivers kind of the same thing. So like it's primarily like Fields, just downgrading that game overall because I have less FOMO with that game than I would otherwise.
The point I was trying to make is we're not blindly taking the games that are indoors based on these findings.
Right.
It's adjusting across the board how we need to.
And I'm not crossing off Justin Fields either, to be clear, just downgrading.
Yeah.
Which leads us into your second trend, talking about the Bears, because the Bears have actually shown some life the past 2 weeks. And when we have a quarterback who runs, that's kind of intriguing. So you're digging into the Bears and what they've been doing recently and whether that resurgence is sustainable.
Yeah. And they have one of the cheat codes at quarterback where, like you pointed out, if it weren't for the wins being high, we'd probably just say, like, let's play a lot of Justin Fields. And that's not necessarily point chasing because he's been playing well. He's salaried where he kind of needs to be to account for his upside. His salary is now $8,500 after a second straight 4-touchdown game. In his career, he had just one single 3-touchdown game and then went ahead and put up 8 over the past 2 games. So that's very noteworthy. Of course, the EPA per dropback numbers are very good when you're just slinging touchdowns. He's at a 0.24 EPA per dropback over the past 2 games. League average this season is quite low at a negative 0.07. If you adjust for the opponents faced, even with the touchdowns, he's at a 0.04, though. He's played above opponent expectation. I'll give him that. But he's done this against weaker defenses. Through the first 3 games, he was at a negative 0.31 in that stat. So I'm not saying it's all opponent based, but it's been a lot of opponents impacting his production. But guess what? He gets another good matchup this week, so who cares? Let's not overthink it. His sack rate, I will say, I thought maybe he was just taking fewer sacks. He's really not. He's at a 9.9% over the past 2 games after being at 12.9% through the first 3 weeks. But what has really changed is, yes, the yardage, but obviously it's the touchdowns. He has thrown a touchdown over the past 2 weeks on 12.5% of his pass attempts. His career rate is 4.7%. Last year was a career best at a 5.3%. Long-term players kind of play toward their career averages. Sure, his numbers should increase as he gets more acclimated to the NFL. So I'm not like his career number should float upward from here, but it ain't going to be 12.5%. I'll tell you that much. But he's still rushing the ball and he's got a good matchup. The wind is up. Like there are reasons to think he'll run the ball a lot, and that's also needs to be factored in here. But he's got a very clear stacking candidate with DJ Moore. I think his salary is a bit high though at 8,000. He's got 5 touchdowns over the past 3 games. Target share is 24% for the season, 34% though over the past 2 games. He's getting some downfield work, which should take a step back in the high winds or just be extra volatile. Darnell Mooney's at a 14% target share over the past 2 games. Cole Kmet, though, 24.6%. Getting a lot of red zone work like that, especially on a slate where tight end's bad. I'm more okay with tight ends and lower ADOT guys in high winds. We already touched on the running backs a little bit. I think that there's a path to Deontay Foreman or Roschon Johnson being viable depending on the health and status of each other. We talked about the Vikings. This game, it's a 1 QB game because we're not playing Kirk Cousins, but is it a mistake to be too low on Fields even with the win, despite all you just talked about?
Well, I think if you were to make a case in favor of Fields, it's that he's played and win like every game in his career, basically. I looked at this last year. Like, I don't think he had a home game or a game last year with low wins. Then he went to Atlanta and played indoors, and I'm pretty sure he flopped, which was super, super sick. But like that could be the case for him. The problem is what you alluded to, with the salaries increasing on Fields, DJ Moore, and Kmet. Like they're all fine plays, but like their salaries have gone up. They're in imperfect conditions. And as we said, the public is not as reactive to wind as they potentially should be. So I think the big thing here is it makes me more receptive to the backfield because like I want an efficient offense, and they've shown that they can be efficient at times. So if Roschon Johnson clears concussion protocol, his salary is $5,800, and I know he'll get passing game work because we've seen him do that already, and he'll probably get some early down work too. So I feel like we could talk ourselves into Roschon pretty easily if he were to be the one guy who's active. Deontay Foreman, if Roschon is inactive, is going to get probably all the early down work and maybe get a target or 2 in there too. So I feel like, to me, it helps me be more okay with this backfield depending on the way things break. And I think that's a benefit. There is an opportunity cost because it means I'm using fewer of the really fun running backs in the 7,000 range. But like, if it helps me get to McCaffrey, et cetera, it could be worthwhile.
Let's say there's just one of these running backs active.
Mm-hmm.
Are they like close to core plays?
Fringe-ish.
Yeah.
Fringe core plays, which means like 20 to 30%, I would say.
And then how do you compare them to a full by Friday Jeff Wilson?
I don't know. You kind of talked me into Jeff Wilson. So
yeah.
But I'd favor these guys, but like he's very tempting.
But the reason you would favor them, but the reason I'm asking is like we could get a featured back in this offense that should run the ball a lot in the conditions.
Yeah,
Jeff will like that completely changes. I don't want to say the primary because like that's not like every lineup we're building has 2 like extreme value play running backs,
right?
But that's a possibility.
Yeah. I think it's at least worth considering. Do you prefer Wilson or those guys?
I think I have to prefer Wilson within the offense, but
yeah.
And the salary savings.
I'm glad you asked about him. That was very smart. Okay. Let's move on to my second trend here and talk about the 49ers. They're in a tough matchup this week against the Browns. It's a low total game, a lot of wins. But this offense is disgusting, and Christian McCaffrey projects well above the pack. So we had to at least discuss them here. And luckily, we have a lot of data on the 49ers facing tough defenses. They just did it last week against the Cowboys. If we look at the 13 games Brock Purdy has played and finished since he took over as quarterback, counting the playoffs, but omitting that game where he left early, the 49ers have played 5 games against top 10 defenses by numberFire's schedule-adjusted metrics. They have scored 30 plus games in all but one of, or 30 plus points in all but one of those games, including 32.6 points per game on average. My gosh, they are disgusting. Purdy has had at least 16 FanDuel points in all but one, but 26.1 points is his max. I don't think we need to get here in this spot just because the wind is high, but like, he's fun. Christian McCaffrey, 18.6 FanDuel points per game there. He's top 24 twice, but he's also been under 15 on 3 occasions. McCaffrey, 119 plus yards from scrimmage in all but one game so far this year. I don't know if we'll have the value to get to McCaffrey at 10-3, but I do want to at least give it a thought. And that's why guys like Roshan Johnson, Jeff Wilson, Jonathan Mingo are worth considering, is because McCaffrey, even in a tough matchup, is worth thinking of. As for the pass catchers, one of them typically does pop off while the others fall behind. George Kittle has had 2 of his explosion games in these tougher matchups. Brandon Ayuk had 29 against the Steelers back in week 1. Deebo Samuel has not blown up, but he did miss one of those games. He also had 3 red zone rush attempts last week, and he has 4 of those so far this season. Deebo's salary is 72. Ayuk is 77. Ayuk has been dominating targets this year, so I'd lean that way, but Deebo is not totally off the map, even though this game does have a low total. As for Kittle, his salary is 59. I'm guessing his roster rate will be too high this week, following his blow up where he had 3 touchdowns on 4 targets, but I'm fine missing out because his target share in games with Ayuk is 14.3%. So I'm on board with McCaffrey. I'm willing to consider Ayuk and Deebo despite the matchup and despite the wind. Does the total or the wind push you off of any of those guys for this week?
I think it's the total, the wind, the potential for this to be a what?
That's fair. I was laughing because you're right, but
well, it's the total, the wind, the matchup, I don't say hot hand approach, but like the ability to guess wrong is very easy with the pass catchers. I don't love that.
But there's upside to compensate for that. Like, you could be wrong, but like, what do you get if you're right? And I think what you get if you're right on these guys can be very, very good.
Okay.
Like, I don't feel like I want to put the graphic up, but
yeah, but you can't just say like, sure, 3 pass catchers are in play in a game with a total that's like.
But the best case scenario is one of them goes off for 28 points. Best case scenario for a lot of wide receivers is a lot lower than that. And I want to focus on ceiling because I want first. And they can get me there. Whereas
Amon-Ra or Ayuk? Nakua or Ayuk?
Nakua. But it's not a definitive Nakua, right?
Devontae Smith or Deebo or Ayuk?
You I had a lineup that should have been very good last week, but it had Devontae Smith in it, so maybe don't ask me about him this week.
Calvin Ridley, Marquise Brown versus Deebo.
Probably those guys, but like again, I'll be in this range a lot. So
yeah, so we're on the same page. Where like I get it, but if I'm building a small handful of lineups, these guys are harder to justify than a Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Or
what about McCaffrey? Is he worth prioritizing for you?
Boy, if I talk myself into Jeff Wilson, yeah, because that's what 15-3 divided by 2. So if they were each like 7,700, or if like McCaffrey was 96, or I guess if McCaffrey was like 9,3 and Wilson were 6,000, that would be a lot easier to think about.
If you put in Jeff Wilson, Christian McCaffrey, and just like the Bears defense, because they're very low salaried and playing in wind, 69-17 left for everything except for the other spots. So let's go with Ingram here. Like, you can do that. You can make that work pretty easily. Let's see.
What do you mean you can do? Yeah, with a complete punt play, not even punt play, because like punt play in salary alone, but
even with Breece Hall though, I think you can get to him. So like I think McCaffrey's pretty doable this week.
Yeah, so like let's just put it out there. You can only build one lineup this week. You don't necessarily know if Wilson is going to be active. You don't know if maybe the Bears have both guys playing and you're just like, I don't want to get there. Is Christian McCaffrey in that lineup?
Probably not.
I'm leaning not as well.
But if I have two single entry lineups, and you should differentiate across single entry lineups, I think he's in one of the two.
Okay.
So that's probably where I'm at.
So even at that salary, even in this matchup,
yep,
he is very close to being someone we want to go out of our way to play. Correct. And then Tyreek or McCaffrey. Like 8 out of 10 times, 7, 9, 10.
7.5.
Okay. All right. I'll take it.
Sure. Okay. Right. Weather for this week. Let's run through the games with the wind, high wind projections. The highest wind speeds right now are in Cleveland and Tampa Bay. 14 miles per hour in Cleveland for the Browns and 49ers. 14 in Tampa for the Bucks and Lions. It's 13 in Chicago for the Bears and Vikings with potential rain and potentially a muddy field there. It's 11 miles per hour in Cincinnati for the Bengals and Seahawks. 10 in Jacksonville for the Jags and Colts. And 10 in East Rutherford for the Jets and Eagles. So biggest concern games are Chicago, Tampa Bay, and Cleveland. I would say I'm okay with Cincinnati and Seattle right now. I'm okay with the Jags, Colts, and Eagles, Jets, but all those games worth monitoring because, again, once wind speeds get above 10 miles per hour, that's where quarterbacks and receivers both get downgraded. For a running back, not as big of a concern, but like still something I do care about. So keep close tabs on those wind speeds as the weekend progresses. Let's go now position by position and break down our top plays on FanDuel for this week. Brandon, starting off at quarterback, which guys are you on in week number 6?
Yeah, we have a lot of overlap this week, but I'm starting with Jalen Hurts. I think he is. I'm talking myself into Justin Fields a little bit more, but Jalen Hurts, I think, has fewer question marks. And he and Fields really have the paths to rushing and, 60 rushing yards and a touchdown, and that just changes the slate. New York is 13th against the pass, according to numberFire's EPA metrics, but it's weaker than you would think, but like you pointed out, probably not going to last forever, that they're just sort of around league average. But Hurts has played 2 top half pass defenses according to numberFire's metrics this year. He's averaged 290 and a touchdown, as well as 12.5 carries and 50 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And those, like, I'm not saying I'm not saying he's like matchup proof, but he's still a very good play. And I think that there are enough viable alternatives that I think will probably be a little bit overlooked. Maybe not, but I also Trevor Lawrence. I think he might be in my main lineup. Just sort of take the savings. Especially if I want to get to McCaffrey, I don't know how easy it is to do like Hurts or Fields in McCaffrey, but it is a second time around divisional matchup. But nobody's perfect. Everyone's got some sort of issue at quarterback. Lawrence hasn't had the upside yet this season, but as you always point out, there are building blocks there. 15 rushes, 73 yards the past 2 games. Just one of the best game environments of the week. So I like him. And I was very close to going Joe Burrow here, still close to Stafford. And I guess we got to not forget Dobbs.
Potentially, yeah. I had Hurts my top guy, and I would rank him first. But let me talk about Tua quick. Tua Tagovailoa, $8,300, because again, we don't have like as many high upside guys in the slate. And Tua is that, but just like a different path to it. It's not via rushing; it's via extremely efficient passing. There's no Devon Achane here, which means they may be a bit more pass heavy than they have been as of late. And we know where the ball is going. So from a stacking perspective, he grades that well there. Like I prefer to pair him with Tyreek and Waddle, but like I could just go with Waddle if I want to save some salary and go that route too. Waddle 10 targets this past week. So I think Tua Tagovailoa 83 is pretty attractive. Again, wind speed around 9 miles per hour in that game. I had that as the highest total on the slate based on my model. So really not opposed to it. And I think Tua is worth a bit more discussion. I also, Trevor Lawrence is my number 2 guy. Wind speed's there, 10 miles per hour. He did face Indy once, but I thought he played really well in that game. They're not a matchup we need to fear. They're the 22nd ranked pass defense by my numbers, once you include a prior there. Lawrence has had double-digit rushing yards in every game so far this year, something he did in just 9 out of 17 games last year. So he's running more and running better, I would say, did last year. No rushing touchdowns yet, but he does have 5 rush attempts inside the red zone. So he's probably due for some positive regression in terms of rushing touchdowns. So I think Lawrence is really fun at 76, and I want to be there pretty often. Let's go to running back, Brandon. Who stands out to you there on FanDuel for this week?
Sticking with the Jaguars, Travis Etienne, salary of 7,700. 78% snap rate this year, almost 60% of the team's routes, 19 carries, 4.2 targets per game to get over 100 scrimmage yards per contest. Going to play a lot, tied to a good implied team total. Only concern is that this is a second time around divisional matchup. Second love is Joe Mixon at a salary of 7,000. I'm just going to keep going there. But 76% snap rate for him. Clearly due for positive touchdown regression. 1 touchdown this year, but he has all 17 of the team's red zone carries. 81.6 scrimmage yards per game. Not great, but 12th among healthy backs in the main slate. That's with a catch rate over expectation of minus 8.6%. So he's going to catch some more passes, get some more yards there. And not really a matchup to avoid. Third love, this could change. This honestly could have changed based on if we were doing this show Saturday and we knew practice could be Jeff Wilson. But Rachaad White, I feel really good there, 6,300. Like this game for mini stacks, Detroit and Tampa Bay, but 77% snap rates. That's 6th among main slate running backs. 77% of the team's red zone rushes as well. That's 4th on the main slate. So it's a good role. He needs to do a little bit more with it, of course, but he'll get passing work if they're behind. Things could change later on in the season, but coming out of the bye, they should have something figured out here to get the offense. And the offense has played decently well. And if there's no Mike Evans, obviously decreases offensive expectations a little bit, but White can get targets.
The 2 best quarterbacks on the slate, obviously, as well. We should
yes.
consider that, obviously. As far as me, my top running back of this week is a guy we talked about a lot so far in this podcast. Let's Travis Etienne at $7,700. Etienne's role, I think, is kind of a bit underappreciated right now. He's averaging 108 yards in scrimmage per game. He has 19 carries per game and 4.2 targets. So we talked a lot coming into this year about his passing game role and his red zone role. The red zone role is still not perfect, but it is improving. And the passing game role has been very, very good. Again, 4.2 targets per game. I would say he's pretty undersalaried at 77, given the offense, given how good he's been. All things considered, I think the ETN has to be, even if we consider the potential value backs, Travis Etienne is my favorite play at running back across the entire slate for week number 6. My number 2 love is going to be Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara's salary is $7,500. He's at 16.5 carries and 8.5 targets per game across his first 2 games with a 73% red zone share. I know we worry about Taysom Hill in the red zone. That could still happen, but Kamara's red zone role is fantastic. The game is indoors, so scoring expectations are higher than they would be otherwise. The Texans' rush defense is not bad, but also not one we need to fear. So looking at that game, we want to get exposure to indoor games. I think Kamara is the best route for doing so, and 75 is too low for the kind of role he could have. So Alvin Kamara, to me, is a fantastic play in week number 6. My third love is also Rachaad White. The Lions' rush defense looked pretty good so far this year, but this role is really good at 63. 70% snap rate for Rachaad White in every game so far. He gets the early down work, gets a passing game work, 42% red zone share. He's coming off a bye at a low salary. This offense does get downgraded if Mike Evans can't go, and that is worth considering. But I think Rachaad White is, like, the more I think about it, the Roschon Johnson and Deontay Foreman discussion, if both those guys are active, like if Roschon plays, I probably should just favor Rachaad White. Like, the more I think about it. Like, I kind of overlooked him during the show, so... Yeah. I think Rachaad White's a really, really good play and a guy I like quite a bit. Let's move to receiver. What stands out to you there?
So we have the same 3 guys. I'll try to pivot a little bit, but just to clarify, Jim's 3 loves are my top 3 loves. I had Cooper Kupp, but I can talk about Puka Nacua, who again had a better weighted target output than Kupp last week. Gets downfield work. Probably not going to get as much red zone work, but Arizona is allowing a 9.4% catch rate over expectation to opposing receivers. That's third highest in the NFL. There's enough to go around for these two guys. Supporting two fantasy relevant receivers is nothing new, and in today's NFL, very, very doable if you just sort of pepper two guys, and it's clearly what their plan is. Second love was going to be Calvin Ridley, but I'll pivot to Jordan Addison. No, I'm going to go Michael Pittman. I like both, but Pittman's part of that game, just a bring back stack. 11 targets in Minshew's start. He's involved. There's got to be better days ahead in terms of production for Pittman. We kind of rag on him a little bit for that lack of production. I don't really think it's all his fault. And I do think that he's got a clear path to production. Godwin, though, is in the same tier, I think, as like Rachaad White, where we should like him a lot more than we kind of even let on.
Sure.
Godwin, to the point, like when we were filling out that skeleton lineup, like Godwin probably should have been in it. White has a chance to do it, but Godwin's salary is very nice. But I kind of like Michael Thomas if you're really like, out there. It's don't have to worry about the weather. Solid matchup against Houston, who's really forcing a low ADOT, but a really high expected catch rate.
It's Michael
I think
Thomas.
You could do worse. What's that?
Blends really well with him. That is what he is.
Again, give me Godwin 9 times out of 10, but Michael Thomas, I think you can do worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. My first love is Cooper Kupp, as you alluded to. He had a fantastic role last week where he played nearly every snap. He had 12 targets, 3 of those were deep. It's a great game for stacking. It is a great matchup indoors, so I can't find anything against Cooper Kupp, which is very weird for me. So for 87, I think he's still very worth it. So I love Cooper Kupp this week, which is heartbreaking. My second love is Calvin Ridley. His role has been up and down at times, but he's shown great upside. He's at 100 plus yards twice already. He has a 38% deep target share with 40% in the red zone. That's not even if you look at just like that's with Zay Jones playing most of those games. And if he doesn't play, could shovel more targets towards Ridley's way. Tore it up against his defense back in week 1. So I think that it's really hard not to like Calvin Ridley for this week. My third love at wide receiver, I'm going to mesh with you here and go with Chris Godwin. Godwin's had a really good role this year, even while playing alongside Mike Evans. He has a 26% overall target share with 20% of the deep work and a 37% red zone target share. He had 114 yards back in week 4 when Evans left early because of that hamstring injury. His salary is $6,300, playing in a decent game where the wind is scary, but like also not enough to like totally push me off given the way that Godwin is used, given his workload and stuff like that. I think there's still enough there to be on Godwin, even with the win being a bit dicey in this game. So if you want to say salary at wide receiver without sacrificing upside, Chris Godwin to me is the optimal route for doing so. Let's move now to tight end, Brandon. Who stands out to you down there?
TJ Hawkins down there.
Well, on the spreadsheet, it's or on the rundown, it's lower.
Yeah, but you really mean like in terms of priority down the list of how to prioritize positions. But
Por qué no los dos? Yeah.
TJ Hawkinson, should see an influx of targets. He's already at a high target share, 26%, but got to throw it to someone. I don't really know if they're going to involve too many more players. But 7.8 targets, 50.8 yards per game. That's, or sorry, 50.8 yards per game. And I was trying to look this up. Hasn't really done it with one explosive game. He's at 35, 66, 78, 24, 51. It's fine. And there should be more. It's a good matchup against the Bears, who are allowing a 9.5% catch rate over expectation. 2 tight ends. Second love is going to be Evan Ingram, though. He's my real true number 1 love. He honestly just trails Hawkinson in my like floor versus ceiling probability simulations. Colts are letting up the second highest target per route rate to tight ends in the NFL. If Zay Jones is out, especially like bump Ingram up. I know we talked a lot about the Jaguars, but he's very much in play.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I also have Hawkinson as my top love because, again, he's got a 20% target share alongside Jefferson this year. I think we should have the ability to get to Hawkinson if we pepper that mid-range. He did get some downfield work in week 5 and may get more now with Jefferson being out. 21% red zone share too. So Hawkinson, not typically a guy I go to, but I will for this week. My second love is Logan Thomas. I feel like we should have probably talked more about the Commanders in some way because they're going to throw a lot. Their target shares suck. But like, Thomas has a 17% target share of the games he has played. That's 19% if you omit the game he left early due to a concussion. He's getting looks deep, getting looks inside the red zone, $5,400. Just quickly, Brandon. I almost had McLaurin in my loves at 69. You know, I don't like him either. Typically, Jahan Dotson's 57. Their target shares stink, but like, should we be considering Jahan Dotson as a value play, or have we been burned by that enough times where we can stop?
We've been burned. There's definitely upside.
Yeah.
As for like McLaurin or Garrett Wilson this week, same salary.
Oh man, McLaurin's indoors. I should probably go McLaurin.
Is that close for you then?
I don't really want to go McLaurin, but I probably should, right?
I mean, like McLaurin or Dotson stacks with Bijan, or
I don't
Kyle Pitts.
Bijan annoys me now. He's on the
Yeah.
poop list. Not the pup list. He's on the poop list. There's a difference.
It's a good
Bijan
shout.
76. That's down from where it was, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe I should like him more.
I think he's in play.
Okay. Fair enough.
There's a good mini stack game.
He's right between ETN and Kamara, though. I think that's my biggest issue. And I like both those guys more.
But maybe these quarterbacks just rush for everything, though. You know.
Maybe. All right, defense. What you got there?
I have a team going up against Washington. But that doesn't mean that Washington's a bad play. This is the process of finding defenses. You get a lot of points. Over 60% of FanDuel points come from sacks and interceptions. Not that interceptions are super easy to predict, but sacks kind of are. Washington is throwing it a lot. They lead the league in pass rate over expectation. Sam Howell's taken a ton of sacks, 6 points higher than the league average. Atlanta does not generate a lot of pressure, but Howell has played 2 matchups against teams bottom 8 in pressure rate, and he's taken 5.5 sacks per game. So he'll give them up. He'll find a way.
Yep, he did that in college too, so it's not a surprise. This is an expected thing with Howell. I like Howell, but like this is gonna happen.
Yeah,
it's not new. My love is the Bears, just because I don't get a lot of low salary defenses I can justify, and they're $3,200. So if I want to get to McCaffrey, like sure, like let's party. They're not a good defense by any means, but the Vikings have no Justin Jefferson. Kirk Cousins he'll make some mistakes every now and then, and it's a high win game, so I'm gonna use them. Should I use them? Maybe not, but like I'm gonna. So whatever. That's where we are. Any final thoughts for you, Brandon, before we close up shop for this week?
I think it's a week where paying attention to injuries will help because we could get some value. And like if there's no Jeff Wilson, that makes Raheem Mostert someone like.
Yeah.
So I think you got to stay tuned to the injury report and how the win actually ends up by Sunday.
Yeah, because a lot of stuff can change by then. So update that later on, as always. That is all that we have here for today on the Heat Check. Make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on FanDuel TV Plus and the FanDuel YouTube page as well. Back on Monday to wrap it all up. Brandon, people have questions for you on Twitter. Where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow FanDuel Research at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your lineups. We'll talk to you once again Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by, not by numberFire, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.